You know this place. White walls, numbered chambers, a voice that wants you to think it wishes you well. You've been here before, you know how it works, you know what to expect. And then the wall cracks. Beneath the clean white surface, something else, something vast. Pipes and catwalks and darkness stretching further than it should. Aperture Science isn't a testing facility, it's a building, and the building is enormous and old, and most of it you've never seen. And then it goes deeper, past the modern facility, past the overgrown chambers where nature has been quietly reclaiming the corridors for years, down through layers of history, into an Aperture Science that existed before the white walls, before GLaDOS, before any of it. Hand-painted murals, vintage safety posters, the voice of a man long dead, echoing through spaces he built decades ago with a certainty that everything was going to go exactly as planned. It didn't, but you already knew that. What Portal 2 understood, and what almost no sequel has ever managed, is that the world its predecessor built was only the surface. That underneath the clean lines and the numbered chambers was something richer, stranger, and more worth exploring than anyone had imagined when they first stepped through that first orange portal. That discovery is waiting for you. It was waiting on April 18th, 2011, when Valve released Portal 2 into the world. So settle in, fire up your portal gun, and join us as we trace the long, strange, wonderfully accidental road that led to one of the most celebrated sequels ever made on today's trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 294th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby video games a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we are looking back at Portal 2, the 2011 puzzle game that Valve took. The 2011 puzzle game from Valve that took one of the most beloved games ever made and built something bigger, stranger, and more fully realized around it. A game that spent years becoming itself, threw out more good ideas than most studios ever have, and arrived with a world worth getting lost in, characters worth remembering, and a co-op campaign that changed how people thought about solving problems together. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, a man who I have no doubt approached every last test chamber in Portal 2 with complete confidence, announced that he knew exactly what to do, and then spent 45 minutes doing the wrong thing before accidentally stumbling onto the solution. He's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, what's the longest you've ever stood in a room before realizing the answer was directly behind you the whole time?
You know, I think that it's still ongoing, Dave.
That's true. The timer has never stopped.
It has never stopped. Yeah, eternally.
The answer is in the room with us.
Is the answer in the room with us?
That sounds so cliche.
I think that it might be because, Dave, we're not alone.
It's like the reward is all the friends we made along the way.
And speaking of friends along the way, why don't you introduce our special guest for today?
And joining us today is a returning guest, returning, who, unlike the rest of us in this conversation, actually has the patience and spatial reasoning to excel at puzzle games. I've invited him to today's episode specifically so that at least one of us sounds like they know what they're talking about. Welcome back, Ryan Shepard. Ryan, Portal 2, I think, is one of those rare sequels that some people consider better than the original. Where do you land on that?
Well, I'd certainly agree it is an amazing game. And depending on what you're getting out of Portal, it is better. But it is, the original Portal, clean, compact, sweet, dense. And Portal 2 is more of that, plus a whole bunch of other sweet stuff. So I would tend to agree. And I'm glad that I'm here because while Valve can only count to two, there are three of us.
True that.
That was a good one. Rob, what is your familiarity of Portal 2? Did you play through it?
Was it not with you? Did I never play it with you? Was it only Damon?
You never played this with me.
No shit.
I have honestly, I was thinking about it as I made this episode. I have, honest to God, never played the co op campaign.
No shit.
And I realized that as I was doing this. I have played the single player campaign many times. I 4 or 5 times at this point, to be honest with you. But I have never once I've played the co-op campaign. Let me be clear about that. I played the co-op campaign. I have never put any substantial time into it, and I certainly have never finished it. So there you go.
Yeah, I've definitely done both a solo and co-op campaign on this game. So, yeah, there's that. You get to play as the tall and the short bot.
True statement. Portal 2, Portal 2 a better sequel. What's your stance?
You know, at the moment, having not played them in quite a while, I don't really know 1 versus 2. But the fact that I don't kind of lends credence to the fact that they're probably both pretty on par, like Ryan said, because if I could easily remember 1 was great, 2 sucked, or vice versa, that would mean that there was a clear winner. But with no memory of it, with no way to say right now that I'm confident 1 or the other was better, I think that they're both pretty damn good.
Those are all fair statements. Well, we have a lot to talk about today, including my stance on that. I think it will probably be very clear by the time we're done with this episode. So, before we get into that, why don't you share with our listeners what else has come out during this week in gaming history?
Alrighty, kicking it off on April 13th, 1990, Crystalis was released for the Nintendo Entertainment System in North America, offering a more narrative-driven take on the action RPG formula. Developed and published by SNK, the game was set in a post-apocalyptic future where magic had replaced advanced technology after a devastating war. Players controlled a young hero awakened from cryogenic sleep, tasked with mastering elemental swords to defeat a rising empire and restore balance to the world. Shocking. Doesn't sound very familiar in the end there. Blending real-time combat with exploration, leveling, and puzzle solving, Crystalis stood out for its depth and structure at a time when the genre was still evolving on consoles. Praised for its gameplay and storytelling, it remains one of the most respected action RPGs of the NES era.
You know what's interesting? As you both know, I recently acquired a new handheld gaming device, like a Steam Deck, if you will. And I've been playing some classic games on it that I own. um, and this was one of the first games I loaded up on it because it's one of those games that has always stuck out to me, like from when I was little, as a decent action RPG. I've never actually finished it. I've probably played through the first like 30 minutes to an hour of it more than a dozen times in my life, but I've never played through the entire game. And I don't really know what that says about me or the game.
For an NES game, that's already half of the game, Dave.
It's got such an interesting premise, and it's interesting to begin with, and I'm sure I'll finish it because now I have save states, and that was why I kind of started. I was like, ooh, now I can finally get to it. But and actually, to be fair, I played it a couple other nights. I'm further along in it now than I think I ever have been, so I might actually finish it this time. Great game, by the way. Okay, that's my story.
Fair enough. I'll take your word for it, having never played it. I don't know. Speaking of games that I've never played, on April 17th, 1992, Ultima 7, The Blackgate, was released for MS-DOS, representing a major evolution in open world design for computer RPGs. Developed and published by Origin Systems, the game returned players to the world of Britannia, where they investigated a mysterious cult known as the Fellowship, not of the Ring. Unlike many RPGs of its time, Ultima 7 featured a fully interactive world where nearly every object could be manipulated, schedules governed NPC behavior, and systems simulated daily life in remarkable detail. Its emphasis on immersion, player freedom, and environmental interaction set a new benchmark for the genre. Widely praised upon release, Ultima 7 remains one of the most influential PC RPGs ever created, shaping the direction of open world game design for years to come.
If I am not mistaken, that was the first Ultima game that had mouse support. And so that like ease of use, that UI design coupled along with the open world, it was one of those like memorable staples in the Ultima series, basically.
That's a series I never got into, but always wanted to.
Same. That one passed me by too. It's funny because you look at some things like that and you're like, that has all the markings of a series I would enjoy, right? Like the next one we're about to do has all the makings of a game I would enjoy, but for whatever reason, just never played it.
Well, for those that are wondering what Dave is talking about, on April 12th, 2005, Jade Empire was released for the Xbox, marking a departure from BioWare's typical Western RPG settings. Inspired by Chinese mythology and martial arts traditions, the game followed a customizable protagonist known as the Spirit Monk on a journey to restore balance to a fractured world. Instead of turn based combat, Jade Empire emphasized real time martial arts fighting styles, allowing players to switch techniques on the fly and tailor their approach to each encounter. Its morality system, presented as the open palm and closed fist philosophies, offered a thematic twist on traditional good and evil choices. Praised for its setting, storytelling, and combat system, Jade Empire remains a standout example of BioWare experimenting beyond its established formula.
Jade Empire, which was my daily video, as many of you know, I've been doing daily videos on TikTok. Jade Empire was what we talked about yesterday on its birthday. We record these on Tuesdays, so yesterday would have been the 12th, today's the 13th. And basically, Jade Empire was BioWare's first original intellectual property, right? Before that, they had just done things in other people's universe. MDK2 is a sequel, Neverwinter Nights, and Baldur's Gate, which is Forgotten Realms, and then they did KOTOR with this, which is Star Wars. So Jade Empire was literally their first original IP before they started making the Mass Effects and Dragon Ages of the world. Basically, Jade Empire walked so all of those series could run.
Was this the game that immediately preceded the first Mass Effect?
I do not.
Feels like the timing's right in there.
This would have been 05 Mass Effect. Yeah, it might be. It might be. I don't know.
07, I think.
Let's
No
see.
idea on that.
Let's see real quick, because I still have that bookmarked from the other day. Jade Empire, then Mass Effect. You got it right on the head.
Back to back bangers for sure.
Back to back bangers for sure. They spent all that time making other people's games, and then they finally said, "Our turn." And then, so Jade Empire, Mass Effect, Sonic Chronicles. I mean, give them a pass. And then Dragon Age Origins. So they just went at it,
And
then would have been Mass Effect 2.
And then
Dragon Age, and then Dragon Age 2.
And then
Star Wars The Old Republic.
And then
Mass Effect 3.
And then
Warhammer Online.
And then
Dragon Age Inquisition.
No more and then.
Yeah, no more. Yeah, we'll go because you guys are getting real close to Anthem, and we don't want to have that conversation.
props to those who get that reference.
What's next, Rob?
Next up, on April 14th, 2009, Demigod was released for PC, blending elements of real time strategy with the emerging multiplayer online battle arena formula. Developed by Gas Powered Games and published by Stardock, the game cast players as powerful demigods competing for ascension, each with unique abilities and roles on the battlefield. Demigod emphasized team based combat, map control, and character progression, drawing comparison to early MOBA style gameplay before the genre fully took hold. While its launch was hindered by significant online and matchmaking issues, the game was praised for its presentation, mechanics, and ambition. Today, Demigod is often remembered as an early bridge between traditional RTS design and the rise of modern MOBAs.
Shout out Stardock.
Yeah, I know, right? The Michigan company. I own Demigod. I don't know if I've ever played it, and I don't know why that is. Because I'm staring at my shelf right now and I have it, and I don't have an answer for that. I think that maybe I like buying games more than playing them, but that's a whole different conversation.
True. Well, last up for this week in gaming history. On April 13th, 2012, Fez was released for Xbox 360, delivering a distinctive blend of 2D platforming and 3D perspective shifting mechanics. Developed by Polytron Corporation and led by Phil Fish, the game followed Gomez, a character who discovers that his flat world exists within a hidden third dimension. Players rotated the environment to reveal new paths, solve puzzles, and uncover secrets scattered throughout the game's cryptic world. With its minimalist storytelling, intricate design, and emphasis on exploration and discovery, Fez became a standout title in the indie game movement of the early 2010s, and praised for its creativity and depth. It remains one of the most celebrated puzzle platformers of its era.
Well deserved praise, in my opinion.
Fez is fantastic.
You can liquidate that stuff and just right into my veins. That was gaming. We're talking about puzzle games, and that right there really scratched the itch for me.
Yep. Fez was definitely one of the goats of the puzzle genre.
Another I didn't play.
This isn't really your genre.
Well, maybe. I don't know.
No, you think so? I mean, every time a new puzzle game comes out, Ryan and I kind of excitedly talk about it, but I don't really ever see you get excited about puzzle games terribly much.
Do you see me get excited about most games, Dave? Do I actually know when most games come out, Dave? Come on.
That is actually a very valid point. I have to share with you when games come out.
Exactly.
Now, you might like it if you played it while wearing a fez.
Wait. Just to be clear to our audience, no fez is required, but it does enhance the performance. Enhance the I don't know if performance was the word I'm looking for, and now it's gone. So
It's
experience. It enhances the experience. Okay. The joke is gone.
It is gone, Dave, and I think that, with that, we should probably get to our topic of today. So, Portal 2?
I don't have a complete voice. I have to be very choicey with my words, and that was a waste of words.
So, Portal 2!
2. The story of Portal 2 is very much like the story of Portal 1 in that it's tied to a small game design school in Redmond, Washington. I'm going to go back to Portal. In 2005, there was a group of students at the DigiPen Institute of Technology who built a student project called Narbacular Drop. Now, Narbacular Drop was a first-person puzzle game built around a single strange idea. What if you could create linked portals on any two surfaces and pass through them instantly? The world didn't bend, physics didn't break. You just stepped through one hole in space and came out another. It was disorienting, it was playful, and it was unlike anything anyone had ever seen in a game before. And that group of students showed it at a career fair. One of the Valve developers saw it, invited them to Valve's headquarters, where they presented it to Gabe Newell, the boss of Valve. He played it and basically offered the entire team a job at Valve before they even left the building. said, hey, come build this game for us. We told that full story back in episode 163. Now, our Backlor Drop part 2 became Portal. And Portal shipped in October of 2007 as part of the Orange Box, bundled alongside Half-Life 2 episodes and Team Fortress 2 almost as an afterthought. I don't think anyone expected Portal to be as popular as it ended up being. It was short. It was strange. Its villain was a passive-aggressive artificial intelligence named GLaDOS, who spent the entire game promising you a cake that didn't exist and then sang you a song over the credits to rub it in. It's a funny way to put it.
Ain't wrong.
No, technically correct.
No, it's so funny when it's just so matter of fact, and it's hilarious when you know that, yeah, that's it. Portal won many Game of the Year awards. It spawned one of the most quoted lines in gaming history. It turned the cake as a lie into a cultural shorthand that people who had never touched a video game somehow still recognized. For a game that almost nobody at Valve expected to be the centerpiece of the Orange Box, it became exactly that. Now, upon its release, Valve had to figure out what came next. And as it turns out, that is a much harder question than it sounds. Now, the first answer that Valve came up with was, don't make Portal. In late 2007, Valve was running a series of internal design experiments aimed at pushing their source engine in new directions. In the building, it was a creative free-for-all. There were different small teams exploring different ideas, and one of those experiments became their first serious attempt at a Portal sequel. They called it F-Stop, as in the camera F-Stop. F-Stop wasn't a sequel. It was a prequel, set during the early days of Aperture Science, back when Cave Johnson was still running the place. It didn't have a portal gun. Instead, the core mechanic was a camera that could change the size of objects based on perspective, shrinking or enlarging things in the environment to solve puzzles. And F-Stop was a clever mechanic, right? It was clever, it was original. People at Valve were genuinely excited about it. The story they wrote, the protagonist wasn't Chell, the protagonist from the first one. It was a character named Mel. The villain wasn't GLaDOS. It was Cave Johnson himself, already having transferred his mind into a computer. And standing in for GLaDOS as a narrative device was a character named Betty. Betty's full name was the Gyroscopic Liability Absolver and Disk Operating System. She was a small morality core mounted on a desk lamp with wheels, whose job was to roll out after Cave Johnson described each test and formally void Aperture Science of any liabilities. Now, in case you hadn't noticed, the writers can't resist themselves. Betty's acronym is GLaDOS, and that's the only nod to the original game's villain, just buried in a piece of bureaucratic wordplay. In the F-Stop experiment, even the enemies were different. Rather than turrets, F-Stop featured mannequins. They were going to be sentient robots who were eventually going to rise up against Aperture Science. They were cut eventually along with everything else. Although, side note, one does remain in the final game. It's sitting deactivated in the temp turret assembly line. So they make this experiment with this cool f-stop camera perspective mechanic, and they put it in front of players. And the feedback they received was immediate and consistent. Where are the portals? Where is GLaDOS? The original GLaDOS? Where is Shell? Where is, where's anything from Portal? The players didn't want a game that happened to be set in the Portal universe. They wanted Portal. The very things that made the original so specific and so beloved were exactly what f-stop was missing. And frankly, there was no amount of clever, camera mechanics, so to speak, that could fill that absence. So f-stop was scrapped in October of 2008. But not everything was lost. As we know, if you played Portal, the 1950s Aperture aesthetic survived. That would eventually become the deep underground sections of the final game, the layers of old Aperture that players uncover on their way through Portal 2. F-Stop opened in a relaxation vault. You literally started the game on a beach, a sunny beach, and then the elements of the beach would kind of fall, revealing the fact that you were inside one of the test chambers essentially the whole time. And so that concept went from a beach to the motel room that opens the finished game of, in the final version of Portal 2. So basically, the world building that they developed during the f-stop phase outlasted the mechanic that inspired that version of the game to begin with. So in fall of 2008, Valve was back to square one. They had spent the better part of a year on an answer that turned out to be the wrong one, but they knew based on feedback that Portal 2 would have to start over. And so in fall, with f-stop now abandoned and a year of work behind them, they started over. Now, there's a little bit of gap that we know of between scrapping f-stop and finding their footing again. We don't know much about what happened after the fall and the winter, basically. But by January of 2009, we know that the team had a new direction. And their plan at this point was that they were going to make a proper Portal sequel. So GLaDOS, the original GLaDOS from the original game, was coming back. So was the main protagonist, Shell. Is it Shell or Shell? Do we know? I don't know.
No.
I've always assumed it's Shell.
Yeah, I'll say Shell. The portal gun was coming back. The concept that they landed on was built around a hub. The player was going to wake up in a damaged Aperture Science facility and discover that GLaDOS was in pieces, hanging by a thread, with most of her parts scattered across the complex. The goal in this version of the game was to put her back together. And to do that, you'd have to venture out into different testing areas, find her personality cores, solve your way through each one, and bring solve your way through each of these testing areas and bring the personality cores back to GLaDOS's chamber. The testing areas were the game. The GLaDOS's chamber was kind of the center of the world. Fans who have documented this phase, they call it the core hub, after that central room that kept that kept everything together. Now, GLaDOS herself in this version was genuinely unhinged, right? She's barely holding together in more ways than one. So she is erratic and aggressive and just all over the place. The plan was for the player to slowly reassemble her across the game, core by core, and feel the weight of what they were rebuilding, right? So the personality cores themselves added to that, but they were also their own characters. One of them was internally known as the paranoid sphere, and it was later nicknamed the Morgan Freeman sphere because it was a core that had spent so long in a small room, it had memorized every detail of it. And when the player finally retrieved it and carried it out to a wider facility, it would narrate the room it had left in obsessive detail and completely fall apart at the sight of the destruction surrounding it. Now, if you're curious why it's the Morgan Freeman sphere, it's because that personality was specifically based on Morgan Freeman's character Red in The Shawshank Redemption. It was a core who had been institutionalized so long that freedom itself was disorienting. The idea from this core, however, a character defined by confinement and the terror of open space would eventually find its way into a certain blue-eyed, British accented personality core in the finished game. Now, the protagonist in this version was still Mel, the character carried over from F-Stop, and this is where, again, something important happened in testing. Playtesters kept expressing the same disappointment. When they encountered GLaDOS from the original game, she didn't recognize them. She treated them like a stranger, and that bothered playtesters in a way that they couldn't quite articulate. Most of them had played Portal. They had a history with GLaDOS. They were expressing the fact that they kind of wanted her to know who they were. And that was a small piece of feedback that had large implications. Because the relationship between the player and GLaDOS wasn't just a story element, it was in a lot of ways something that players had formed an actual attachment to. And a new protagonist completely severed that attachment. So, based on feedback at this point, Shell had to come back. Now, while all this was happening on the story side, a separate development track was running in parallel. Valve had Valve had begun experimenting with new mechanics entirely independent of whatever narrative was being developed. There were light bridges, excursion funnels, aerial faith plates, lasers. A lot of the elements that you see in Portal 2, they were being built here, but without any specific game in mind yet. Uh, they were being invented and tested, then set aside, kind of a growing toolkit waiting for some structure to hang themselves on. Um, as I said, many of them would survive this phase, all these overhauls, and kind of end up in the finished game almost unchanged from this period of time. And then in summer of 2009, something walked through the door that nobody had planned for up until this point. At DigiPen's career day, a team of students were demonstrating a project called Tag, the Power of Paint. Tag was a first person puzzle platformer where players could spray surfaces with different colored paint, each color conferring a different physical property. Red made surfaces fast, green made them bouncy, blue made them adhesive. A Valve recruiter, Robin Walker, the same guy who found Portal, if I'm not mistaken, played the whole thing, asked the team questions about their process, and then hired them. It was almost beat for beat exactly what happened with Narbacular Drop 4 years earlier. Another DigiPen team, another career fair, a Valve recruiter who recognized something worth bringing inside. So the first thing the tag team was asked to do was to rebuild their paint technology from scratch inside the source engine. They were 4 people in their own office that were basically told to prove that they had what their worth was, right? Around the same time that they finished that internal demo, they were brought into Playtest Portal 2. And within 2 months of joining the company, the question of what to do with the paint technology kind of answered itself in this way. The Portal 2 team started generating ideas for how their paint mechanic could work inside the game's existing mechanics. So by late 2009, the gels, as they were now called, had been merged into the main code base. One thing, to be fair, that didn't survive, the original tag had a blue adhesive paint that let players stick to the surfaces. Playtesters kept getting motion sickness based on this mechanic. So it was cut and replaced with conversion gel. And that's the white substance that lets portals, be placed on surfaces that wouldn't normally accept them. So the mechanic changed, but the spirit of tag really didn't.
When I think of Portal 2, like one of the main things that I think about that distinguishes itself from Portal 1, other than, like the story and some of the, kind of other items. The gels were so fun and cool.
They were fun and cool. And it's funny that both mechanics were invented by student teams.
Shout out DigiPen.
Shout out DigiPen.
When I was a little kid, I wanted to go to DigiPen.
Nice. Nice. I think the time I started getting into it, Full Sail was the thing. So by the end of 2009, at this point, Portal 2 had its portal gun, now had a returning protagonist, had its villain, a growing library of new mechanics, and now paint that could transform any surface in the world. It had almost everything it needed. What it didn't have, though, was a story that actually worked. By late 2009, the core hub concept was gone. The story of, multiple cores being collected and return to GLaDOS had been scrapped, and Valve was rewriting again. Now, this phase, which fans have now dubbed multi-core, was where Portal 2 in its current iteration really started to look like itself. The new story that developed during multi-core was structured more like the finished game, though there are significant differences that remained. The personality core from the previous iteration, they didn't disappear entirely. As we know, they evolved. One of them, the one we talked about, the Morgan Freeman sphere, had been doing something interesting in playtests. Rather than staying in one place, it would peek at the player from walls and corridors and then follow them through the facility, narrating obsessively. That behavior, this small, anxious presence shadowing the player and talking too much, was exactly what the right instinct. It was what the game needed. It just needed this like fleshed out character to inhabit the core fully. And that character became Wheatley. Wheatley began as a synthesis of all those earlier cores with their functions and their personalities all consolidated into one. In Wheatley's earliest form, he was voiced by a Valve animator named Richard Lord, who put on a Cockney accent as a placeholder while the team figured out what they had. And you can actually find some of that placeholder voice online. It's recognizably Wheatley in spirit, with the cadence and the mild panic, with the sense that this particular artificial intelligence, it's doing it, is doing its best and just kind of falling short. But to be fair, they still felt something was missing, right? Valve knew what kind of voice they wanted. They actually had been watching Extras, the British comedy series, and one voice kept coming to mind. They wrote the character with Stephen Merchant in mind, fully expecting that he would never ever actually agree to do it. They even explored alternatives, reaching out to Grant Linehan, the writer of the IT Crowd, about the possibility of casting Richard Ayoade. But before that went anywhere, they actually did approach Merchant's agents and were surprised to find that he said yes. What Merchant brought to that role was something the writers had kind of been chasing with Wheatley from the beginning: the ability to deliver a lot of information very fast while remaining completely understandable, a gift for sounding mildly frantic, improvisational quality that made Wheatley, that made every line feel like Wheatley was genuinely working things out in real time, that he was just kind of making it out as he went along. As lead writer Eric Walpole put it, they never really ever had a sidekick in gaming who sounded as if they were just talking off the top of the head. And that was the goal with Wheatley. And they felt that only Stephen Merchant was able to deliver that type of performance. So with Wheatley in place, other pieces kind of clicked into alignment. The underground sections of Aperture, the deep layers of old infrastructure beneath the modern testing facility became the right environment to explore both the gel mechanics and the history of the company. So that 1950s aesthetic that had survived from F-Stop finally found a home. Cave Johnson, who had been the villain of F-Stop, a game that no longer existed, became something different and in many ways more interesting, right? He's now a voice from the past, heard only in recordings, telling the story of how everything went wrong long before Shell ever woke up. And so now we have a game that's being built. But running parallel to this was another question that Valve had been wrestling with ever since Portal shipped. In the months after the original game's release, they had noticed that players weren't just playing Portal alone. They were playing it together. There could be one person on the controller while another person is sitting on the couch talking through puzzles, pointing at the screen, working it out, collaboratively. These were things that were happening organically, but without any real design for it. And so Valve wanted to formalize a design. And so that's when they decided to put co op into the game. But to be fair, first they tried to break it. Before co op puzzle solving became the obvious answer, Valve spent time exploring competitive multiplayer. 4 or 5 different iterations of it. The most developed was essentially speedball with portals. So it's a ball sport where players could use portals to move down the field and drop each other into hazards. It sounds really fun when you put it down on paper that way. And then they put 8 people into a room and made them play it, and it just fell apart. 8 people, bunny hopping around trying to avoid each other's portals, zapping each other with lasers. Uh, Wolfpaul said that it took a long time for them to build it, and then about 5 minutes to realize that they had made a terrible, terrible mistake.
Oh, I mean, I can imagine that being a game that, unless I was really, really good at it, I would be very frustrated. Got a high degree of difficulty for in terms of learning curve.
Well, portals in multiplayer games, I think, are complicated. We have one right now. Have you ever, either of you, played Splitgate yet?
I have, yes.
What?
Yes.
So, what do we think about Splitgate? Because that's a first person shooter with portals, right?
Correct. Yeah,
It-
I played the OG Splitgate when it was kind of first in beta, and I loved it. Yeah, I thought it was like Portal and almost like Halo kind of had a baby.
That's exactly how I felt too. I thought it was a very good combination. It was a very good mechanic to add, and thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, I have not given it a shot since they've kind of done the sequel route, but yeah,
To be fair, though, Splitgate doesn't really let you put portals at people's feet, if I remember correctly. Isn't it just walls?
walls and some other surfaces, I think.
I just remember walls.
Yeah.
So, what they realized is they're kind of trying to make a competitive portal game, so to speak, was that when you go through a portal that you place yourself, it's kind of disorienting. When you have to be dropped into one that someone else fired right at your feet, that was just chaos as far as they were concerned. Yeah, it was just it was just a lot. It was a lot.
When you're doing it with intentionality. I'm going to go over here, boom. But if someone shoots and you're not paying attention, yeah, you're
Yeah, for sure.
trying to pick up the pieces.
So they learned really quick that competitive portals was not the thing, and then they went back to lean towards cooperation. And as we know, the result was a completely separate campaign, right? 2 players, 2 portal guns, 4 portals, its own stories, its own characters, a beginning, middle, and end. The co op campaign itself is roughly 2.5 times the size of the original Portal. Um, Now, the design constraints of the co op were strict. Every puzzle had to require 4 portals to solve. If one player could find a solution using only their pair of portals, the puzzle went back to the drawing board. And that single rule meant that the co op campaign couldn't share any puzzles with the single player campaign. It had to be its own thing. designed from scratch around a completely different set of problems. And those problems kept producing unexpected results. Adding a second portal gun didn't just double the complexity, it it made portals feel new again. You know, players who had spent hours with the original came in thinking they understood how portals worked, but then four portals made everything feel strange again. So yeah, and the team liked it. After years of working with this mechanic and being comfortable with this mechanic, suddenly it was surprising again. GLaDOS presented her own co-op design challenge. Valve tried having her secretly award one player more points than the other for identical actions, trying to almost manufacture rivalry. Players then immediately started to try to game the system in each other's favor, saying, "No, you go first. You take the points." And so the joke that they wrote in there initially to create competition kept accidentally revealing how much players wanted to cooperate. And so they kind of scaled that humor and that concept back. Um, and as we know, the protagonists are robots. That's a very practical decision, right? Playtesters kept dying and becoming afraid to experiment. They were worried about permanent consequences. So Valve needed a fictional justification for respawning that didn't undermine the story. Robots could be disassembled and reassembled. So death became comedy rather than a consequence. And it gave GLaDOS kind of a reason to treat the players as expendable, which required very little additional justification, given her character. They even at one point tried bringing Mel back, that character from F-Stop, into the Core Hub era. And the placeholder texture still exists in the game's final files. But again, the too much. They just wanted robots, just wanted there to be no justification. In June 2010, Portal 2 was revealed publicly for the first time at E3. The response was immediate. The game had spent 3 years finding itself and now finally had something to show the world. Content lock came in December of 2010, and Portal 2 shipped on April 18th, 2011 on PC, Mac, and for the first time with the Valve game, PlayStation 3, with cross-platform play between PS3 and PC via Steam. We have a game! Yay! Rob, hearing about F-Stop and then Valve spending, the better part of a year building a Portal sequel without portals, putting it in front of players and then having to start completely over makes you appreciate having a process that works from the beginning.
Right. No camera mechanics that go nowhere. No scrapping a year of work because nobody asked for what you built.
Exactly. And a process that works from the beginning is exactly why I use Zencastr. It's an all-in-one broadcasting platform that means you never have to start over. You just log in from your browser, hit record, and you're instantly capturing studio quality audio, and up to 4K video. No complicated setup, no building the wrong thing.
Yeah, but what about when things go wrong mid-recording? Because things always go wrong and there's always someone to tell you about it.
Well, that's where Zencastr's multi-layered backups come in. Even if your connection drops, your recordings stay safe in the highest quality. No lost work, no starting over.
Yeah, but what about editing? Don't tell me it takes a year.
Not even close. Zencastr's post-production tools automatically clean up background noise, trim filler words, and balance your audio. The polish happens without the grind.
Okay, but once it's done, how do we get it out there?
Zencastr distributes your podcast directly to all the major platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more, all from the same dashboard. You can record, refine, and release all in one place.
So basically the opposite of F-Stop.
Absolutely. So if you're interested in using Zencastr, go over to zencastr.com/pricing and use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane, and you can get 30% off the first month of any Zencastr played plan. If you've got a story to tell, Zencastr makes sure that the only thing you're scrapping is your bad takes.
No playtester required.
That's right. So head over to Zencastr, use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane, and you can get 30% off the first month.
So what happened after Portal shipped?
Well, the response, again, immediate, nearly unanimous. Metacritic gave it a 95 on PC, GameSpot 9 out of 10, IGN 9.5, Edge a 10, Game Informer 10, Eurogamer a 10. the reviews didn't just praise it, they competed with each other to find new ways to say that Valve had done the impossible. And the awards followed. Portal 2 swept the 2011 Game of the Year conversation in a way that few games before our since have even managed, right? BAFTA, the Game Developer Choice Awards, the Spike Video Game Awards, Writer Awards, Design Awards, Voice Performance Awards for Stephen Merchant and Ellen McLean, who returned as GLaDOS. They were just sweeping award season. It was the kind of critical reception that just closes arguments. To be fair, though, before the game even shipped, Valve had been already making other statements about how the industry should work, and Portal 2 was their vehicle. The announcement that Portal 2 would come to PlayStation 3 genuinely surprised the industry, because Gabe Newell, the boss of Valve, had criticized that console publicly in the past, citing the troubled port of the Orange Box. Now, this announcement, the move, wasn't a change of heart about the hardware. It was a response to the growing frustration with Microsoft's policies for Xbox 360 content, more specifically the difficulty of releasing patches and updates. Sony had a more open publishing model that gave Valve the room to do something they had never done on a console before. Portal 2 became the first PlayStation 3 game to support Steamworks, and that brought automatic updates, downloadable content, and community features to a Sony game for the first time. Players who bought the PS3 version of the game got the Steam copy for Windows and Mac at no additional charge, and you could have cross-platform play between the PS3, Windows, and Mac versions right upon launch. I actually bought the PS3 version for that reason, because I knew I could have it on two platforms for the cost of one.
Yeah. This was back when cross-platform was
A non-thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah,
now it's almost a given in modern times.
Yeah, I mean that was mind-blowing at the time. Like that was genuinely like, oh my god, this is a thing, you know?
They'd never let us do it.
Valve also moved on to times with motion controls. They worked with a company called 6 Sense, who spent the better part of a year in-house at Valve building the integration, native support for a device called the Razer Hydra on PC. The result of that collaboration wasn't just motion controls layered on top of existing gameplay. It was a separate set of 10 levels designed specifically around what motion could do, in a way that a mouse and keyboard couldn't, including rotating objects held in 3 dimensions, surfing portals along surfaces to redirect objects in mid-flight, and scaling spatial cubes to change their mass. In 2012, that content came to the PS3 under the name Portal 2 in Motion, alongside an update that added support for the PlayStation Move controller. And cool enough, the PlayStation, the orb on the PlayStation Move changes color. It matches whatever color portal you're about to shoot. So that was kind of cool. Motion controls at that time were everywhere thanks to the Wii, and so Portal 2 was not an exception to that rule. And then there was the community. With the Steamworks came basically a community workshop. They called it the Perpetual Testing Initiative. And within days of that eventually launching in May of 2012, the Perpetual Testing Initiative gave players a simplified level editor, and integrated Steam Workshop came, like I said, a year later. Within days of that, stumbling on my words, within days of that, players had created 35,000 levels for Portal. Within a month, that number had crossed 150,000 new levels for Portal. The hunger to build inside this world, right, to extend it, to find new problems for portals to solve, turned out to be essentially bottomless. But in all fairness, probably the most meaningful community contributions weren't maps, they were full campaigns. So Portal Stories Mel, released in 2015, by a team of 8 fans, was a complete standalone campaign of professional quality built inside the Portal 2 engine. The protagonist was Mel, the character from F-Stop, carried through the Core Hub era, assigned a co-op, that person. Uh, while the official game never found a place for her, the community gave her one. Thinking with Time Machine was released in 2014. It gave players the ability to record their own actions and play them back through a duplicate of the player character. And that would include using that mechanic to build a second set of portals. It was exactly the same. There was actually a time-based mechanic that was shown as a little mechanic in the experimental phase. That didn't make the cut in any way, shape, or form. They didn't develop it into much of anything. It was just a mechanic that was built in-house and then cut, and it never saw again until a single fan developer kind of, haphazardly did the same thing, and here we are. There's a custom map commissioned by a man named Gary Hudson, who worked with Eric Wolpaw and Alec McLean to create a single-player level that ended with a marriage proposal. GLaDOS delivered the proposal. The wife said yes. That's kind of cool.
I remember that, yes.
And then the Portal 2 characters, they didn't stay inside the game, right? GLaDOS appeared as an antagonist in the tower defense game defense grid, voiced by McLean. The Space Core from Portal 2 was added to Skyrim as a non-player character that followed the player around. A Portal 2 set appeared in LEGO Dimensions with all the voices from Portal 2 reprising their roles, and a new credits song written by the same guy who wrote the Portal themes, Jonathan Colton. So this world that Valve built just kept escaping the boundaries of its own game. And that brings us back to the question that I started with you two. Question that when the reviews came in, when the sales came in, it's a question that never really stopped. Is Portal 2 better than Portal? And I think, to be fair, you guys nailed it on the head, right? Portal was perfect in its constraints. It is short, it is focused, and it is surprising. You cannot be surprised by Portal in the same way, right? You know the world, you know GLaDOS, you know how portals work. And yet, there is an argument for Portal 2 being a better game. And I think that comes down to a few things. For me, the writing is funnier and deeper, right? You have GLaDOS, but you also have Wheatley. And Wheatley isn't just comic relief. He is another character who has a genuine arc, a personality that shifts in different ways that feel surprising and inevitable, and a final confrontation, and then the game ends up in a final confrontation that lands emotionally in a way that a pure puzzle game has no business pulling off, right? Cave Johnson never appears on screen. He's only a voice on recordings from a man already dead by the time you hear him. And somehow he ends up being one of the most vivid characters in the game. So I think it's fair to say that the writing team understood that the character development had to go above and beyond the characters, right? They also understood that Aperture Science wasn't just a setting, it was its own character as well, with a history and a tragedy and a very specific kind of institutional madness that just got better the deeper you dug into it. So the writing for me is better. Also, I think the world is richer. The world is more realized, right? And that's just the scope. Portal takes place in one corner of Aperture Science, but Portal 2 takes you through the entire thing, from the gleaming modern testing facility that the first game took part in, down to the crumbling infrastructure underneath, right? Through decades of increasingly unhinged decisions made by a man who genuinely believed that he was doing science.
The voice acting for Cave Johnson. Just
It's so good.
it, it is perfection. Yes.
It's so good.
Shout out J.K. Simmons.
When life gives you lemons. It's so good. Oh, man. The world itself told a story. The underground sections with the handwritten notes, the deteriorating murals, the vintage safety posters, they all told a story in itself without a single cutscene. So there's just a lot more storytelling. Not only are the characters more realized, but the environment is more realized as well. And then I think there's a design argument to be had here, which is probably the most impressive thing that Portal 2 accomplishes. Portal taught you how portals worked and made you feel smart for learning. Portal 2 taught you portals all over again, then added new mechanics on top of them that made you feel like a beginner again in the best possible way, right? They had to do something to add on to it to not just make another game. And that's where the gels came in, right? The gels changed how you move through space. And then, they had worked on all those other mechanics. So the light bridges and the excursion funnels changed what the surfaces meant. And then on top of that, they layered the co-op campaign and took everything that you had learned in the single player campaign and made it strange all over again, because 4 portals are not just twice as many portals. That's a completely different problem. So Portal 2 to me is the rare portal that surpasses the original by being what the original was really about and then being more fully that thing. Portal 2 was about making you feel smart, but our Portal rather was about making you feel smart, but Portal 2 found more ways to do that, right? With more context, more characters, more hours, without ever losing the core of what made the game work in the first place. Now, I know not everyone agrees. There are always going to be people that prefer Portal's precision and brevity, who feel that the longer runtime and the heavier narrative dilute something that was perfect in its simplicity. And that's a legitimate position.
If you just want more levels, like, hey, just get on the workshop. There's more levels than you can ever play.
It's so true. I think it's telling in itself, though, that we're having this argument in the first place, right? Because the majority of sequels, by and large, don't get compared to their originals as equals, right? The trend is almost always bad sequel.
Paint by numbers, seen it before.
Yep.
Not the case here.
And so the fact that people still debate that which Portal is better more than a decade later, that we're still having this conversation, says something very important about what Valve built the second go around. It's a great game. Fantastic game. I remember when you got out of the testing facility and into the underneath, when you realized that everything was on top of Aperture Science, and it like blew my mind, right? Like when it opens up in the cavern and you just realize that you're staring at the remnants of the old thing. It's the coolest thing. I mean, what's the first game? First game is what, 3 or 4 hours, and this is 10 or 12. Does that sound right?
It does.
And it is so worth that time. These are some of the best games ever made as a pair, as singles. These are fantastic games. If you've never had a chance to play them, I would highly recommend it. I think Rob is doing another playthrough soon.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I'd be down for that.
Maybe you can finally get that co-op go through.
There you go.
That's actually true. I would like to do that sometime because I have never played through the co-op, and that's a damn shame. So
pick a partner because you got 2 here.
That's a true statement. That's a very true statement. If you want to join the fun, Portal 2 is still available. It runs on modern hardware, goes on sale on Steam. Every one of their sales for literally dollars, a few dollars. And so you should go play it. both of them. I think you could find Portal usually for $1 or $2, and Portal 2 for $2 to $5. Like, it's not a big investment. Um,
I I never played the Portal Stories Mel that you mentioned,
mhm.
but I did play. I believe it was Portal Reloaded, uh,
Yeah,
another kind of full conversion,
yep.
and had a great experience with that. It introduced its own new mechanics and kind of felt like its own, called its own kind of story there.
Yeah, that's saying a lot too, in that the community is trying to keep this universe alive because we know Valve can't count to 3. It just adds to the argument that this is fantastic, and that people want more. People want more. There's nobody that would say no to more Portal. We want to know what else happens to these characters. I mean, yeah, just plain and simple. We want to know what else happens to all these characters.
I'd be happy with just taking some of these, you know, creme de la creme from the workshop and just give them their own release.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't know. It's just a lot of fun. Great game, fantastic game. When you're debating which one is better, that's not the legacy of a game that got lucky. That's not the legacy of a sequel that got lucky, rather. That's the legacy of a sequel that understood exactly what it was trying to do and did it better, did it better than anyone had any expectations for, any right to expect, you know?
You know what? You know what this discussion's reminded me of on the film side of things. Aliens.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That will be
Both fantastic films, but you know, different strengths.
still I still sometimes when I'm mad at something to yell about lemons, and people, I think I work with a lot of people who don't know port. I know they do because they're not gamers, and sometimes if I'm ranting about lemons, I've explained to them once, but I don't think they actually have paid attention to it, you know?
Right.
But that's fantastic. Don't make lemonade. Make life takes the lemons back. Get mad. I
I don't want you to have lemons.
Do you know who I am? I'm the man that's going to burn your house down with the lemons. I'm going to get my engineers to invent a combustible lemon that burns your house down.
Wow.
Demand to see Life's manager. Make life rue the day it thought it could give Cave Johnson lemons. Love it. Love that. Love it. Love it. Love it. All right. Well, if today's episode sent you deeper into the world of puzzle games and developers who push them forward, we've got a few other episodes that connect to that thought. The most obvious is episode 163. This was a triumph, where we told the full story of how Portal came to be, from its student project at DigiPen to one of the most beloved games of its generation. This episode kind of picks up exactly where that one leaves off. If what drew you to Portal 2 was a willingness to use games as a vehicle for something strange, something that makes you question what you're doing and why, episode 101 is for you. Avant-garde office work tells the story of the Stanley Parable, another game built in the Source engine that asked uncomfortable questions about player choice and found an enormous audience by refusing to give comfortable answers. And if you want to go back, way further back, to the roots of puzzle game design and what it means to give a player a problem worth solving, episode 129, Follow the Leader, tells the story of Lemmings, a game that started as a bunch of developers animating tiny men dying in ridiculous ways and ended up giving us a strong basis for the puzzle game genre. All 3 episodes and everything else in our archive are waiting for you at www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can listeners find when they head to this site?
You can find a calendar of our future episode topics and what we'll be talking about in our coming weeks. You can find a link to our Patreon where you can help support us, get access to our ad-free and unedited versions of our episodes. You can find links to our Discord where you can come chat with Dave and I about episode topics, as well as all of our friends that are there, Ryan included, maybe, possibly. You'll never know unless you go there. And you can find links for social media where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor. And Dave?
I can be found on any platform as David is wrong. Each week, we'll tell you one story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game, a person, a technology, a console. We've even covered a few places for you. We'll tell you each story. We hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what to get back to the world in its legacy. When we sit down to research new topics each week, we get excited when we find out new things to share with you. It's this fantastic cycle of learning and teaching, teaching and learning. And in celebration of said cycle, we like to talk about our takeaways each week. So, returning guest Ryan, I'll start with you. What did you learn today?
A few things. Number one, the ridiculous number of workshop levels. I got to get started on that.
Right.
I'll report back once I hit 10,000.
Deal. What else did you learn?
Well, some of the earlier different versions of Portal 2 I didn't know a whole lot about, f-stop, etc. And then thinking about all this workshop stuff, I just think about, like, there's got to be a mod out there that just, even though Stephen Merchant did an amazing job, I'd like to hear a Cockney version of that, or pick an accent.
When Portal 2 came out, there was a multimedia app that came out shortly after, which was called The Final Hours of Portal 2. And Valve put it out, and it was a supplement to the game. And it has a lot of these unused materials, the unused audios and the videos. And of course, after that, people have dug into the code itself and found all these unused assets. But that's, between all of that, they've uncovered and developed this whole history from f-stop to the core hub to the multi-core. And it's a really interesting history to see all the different changes that happened in the process. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Dave, that's a tough one. I learned a lot, obviously. I'm just trying to think of the big takeaway. What about yourself, Dave?
What did I learn today? I like the parallel in the stories between Portal and Portal 2, and that their main mechanics both came from student teams. I think it's really fascinating that the way that came about, right? The Portal 1 was Narbacular Drop and Portal 2 is Tag. A side note to all of that, in a couple of days, that is my topic for the day it came out, which is the 18th. I think that's Saturday. And I actually have video from Narbacular Drop and Tag in that video. So if you ever want to see what the student projects that turned into Portal and Portal 2 look like, go check out my TikTok on the 18th. But aside from that, I just think it's really fascinating the way those two projects came to be. Both student mechanics. So, anything else come to mind, Rob?
You kind of that was definitely one of them. It's interesting to see how that all came to be, but also I guess it's just a lot. This is one of those ones that a lot happened, and
it did. I mean, it's a story none of us would have really had any reason to know. That's why I like doing this every week. We like playing these games, but we don't have any reason to know these stories. But that doesn't make them any less fascinating,
No, I absolutely agree. I think it's cool to learn all of this and to learn how, sometimes something that you made doesn't work out and you change it and make it work. Yeah.
Yeah.
They considered the whole it's not Portal and that's what people wanted mentality, and that's why they went with it. And it's also cool that they'd scrapped the whole 50s idea for the story, and they still had that as part of the map, because when you're talking about it, I'm like, no, I distinctly remember it was like the 50s and it was like the lab you were in. Like, what are you talking about? They scrapped that. And then it's like, oh no, they retain the area, but they didn't retain that being the story. And I was just like, oh, like it's shit like that. It's cool.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to see what stuck around and what didn't, right? Because the 50s aesthetic stayed and Cave Johnson stayed. He just went from being the main bad guy to being the history of the history, right? It set up the story where they were. And I think what that did is it made the world more realized, and brought you further into Aperture Science and what the testing from Portal 1 was, and kind of where everything went wrong. It filled in parts of the story that you never had an opportunity to explore the first go around. So definitely fascinating. All right. Well, we've been running a little long, so I think that's a good place to call it. Ryan, I'm going to start with you before I take it out of here and into next week. Is there anything that you'd like to add to today's episode?
The current speed run for Portal 2 is 55 minutes, just under 55 minutes.
That's insane that someone can beat that game in under an hour.
Yes.
What's the normal? Did you look up the normal playthrough by any chance?
I think when you had said 10 to 12, that's pretty accurate for normal people. For me, I was more like 16 because I like to take my time and mess up a lot.
So, it's got main story on how long to beat listed at 8 to 9 hours, but it also says first time players may take 10 to 15. So I think 10 to 12 is fair for most people.
And I think that's just for the regular campaign. Co-op is probably its own separate add-on.
It is. Co-op is about another 3 to 4 hours. So, all right. Anything else? Thank you for coming.
Oh, you're very welcome.
It's fantastic. Rob, anything that you'd like to add to today's episode?
I'll take one quick moment, as always, to say thank you so much to everyone for listening. We hope you enjoy and hope you like listening. So thank you. And also, thank you to Ryan for joining us. We love having you. So please keep joining as you can.
Yes, indeed. Just a friendly reminder that if you've never taken the time to do so, please go and, give us a rating and some feedback on whichever platform that you use to listen to our podcast. That's a fantastic way to give back to the podcast and help other people, experience these stories week in, week out. So, looking forward to seeing all that from you. Valve spent years trying to answer a question that probably shouldn't have had an answer. How do you follow something that people consider perfect? You don't make more of the same. You don't abandon what made it work. And you definitely don't spend a year building a prequel without portals and expect anyone to be happy about it, as they found out. What you do apparently is start over and then over again. And you keep building and building until the thing in front of you is somebody that nobody had planned for, but everybody recognizes is right. Portal 2 is the product of that process, of a camera mechanic that didn't survive contact with players, but it left its world behind, of a hub concept that got scrapped, but it left its characters behind, of a team of students who walked through a door at a career fair carrying a paint gun, just as another team had walked through a similar door carrying a portal gun 4 years earlier, of a placeholder voice that became a real character, that became Stephen Merchant, that became one of the most memorable performances in gaming history. None of that was planned, but all of it was necessary. And when it was done, Valve had built something that proved a thing the medium really gets to prove, that a sequel can understand what its predecessor was really deeply about enough and care about it and honestly enough to become something greater than the original. Portal 2 is still there, still on Steam. It's still the answer to the question of what game to hand someone who doesn't think that games are for them, right? Still, it's there more than a decade later as the thing that people reach for when they want to explain why gaming as a medium matters to them. That's not an accident. That's what happens when the right idea finds the right people at the right time, even if it takes a few wrong answers to get there. Next week, we are trading the sterile white corridors of Aperture Science for something considerably louder, messier, and more explosive. In 1996, a team at SNK created a run-and-gun arcade game with hand-drawn pixel art so detailed and so expressive that players would pump quarters into the cabinet just to watch what happened next. Metal Slug wasn't just one of the most visually stunning games ever to grace an arcade cabinet. It was a love letter to action cinema, to absurdist humor, and to the kind of craftsmanship that makes you stop mid-level just to appreciate what someone spent weeks drawing, one frame at a time. So join us as we load up, lock and roll, and find out how a small team of artists and programmers made one of the most beloved arcade games ever made on next week's trip down memory card lane. To the
Rocket
bank.
launcher.
Good one. Good one.
All right.
I take it there's some familiarity with the game.
Metal Slug is great. Everybody tune in.
Yeah, Metal Slug is fantastic. All right, good. We got it. I like this ending.
Yeah.
Rob, give me a number. Doobie doobie doo.
Doobie-doo-dop-doo-wop.